An extreme bright eye reflects the somber image of a person standing before them. Thrusting his hand out aggressively, Prince Arthur issues a royal decree and orders the so-called Saint Mira not to address him so casually. He loudly declares to the gathered crowd that the false Saint Mira is hereby banished from their kingdom. The devastating proclamation strikes like a physical blow, shattering the peace of the moment. To understand this tragedy, one must look back at the royal capital of the kingdom of Roldaris, situated in the heart of the continent. For a century, monsters have corrupted the world with miasma, and the only salvation for the tainted land comes from the protective prayers and barriers of the saints. Strumming his lute, a bard sings that Roldaris is no longer a forsaken land, noting that while they suffered 80 years without a saint, the northern nation of Idas prospered under the protection of four. In the bustling streets, ecstatic citizens gossip about an upcoming ceremony marking the traveling Saint Mira's first year in the kingdom and her rumored engagement to Prince Arthur, praising the unprecedented peace she brought. The people firmly believe that she shines a guiding light on the kingdom's future. Within the sanctuary, a nun approaches Lady Mira as she concentrates on a glowing orb. Kneeling before a grand, sunlit altar, Mira is gently informed that breakfast is ready. Glancing back over her shoulder, Mira politely thanks Tura and promises to join her shortly. Walking together, Mira notes that the barrier is secure but expresses concern over the daily increase in monsters, vowing to ease the people's fears as much as possible. Tura happily replies that the upcoming engagement will surely delight the citizens, which Mira admits is precisely the reason she agreed to it. As Mira wonders about her greeting, a stern guard abruptly interrupts and orders them to come with him. They encounter Lord Arthur flanked by heavily armored guards, prompting Mira to offer a polite morning greeting. Without warning, one of the guards violently shoves Mira back with a heavy hand. Tura screams in horror as Lady Mira crashes forcefully to the ground. Disgusted, Arthur commands her not to speak his name so lightly, demanding silence when Tura furiously questions his actions. Glaring down at her, he brands her a false saint and reveals they have testimony from the high priest proving her power is a complete fraud. Tura desperately defends Mira, reminding him that he has witnessed her power countless times, but Arthur arrogantly ignores her pleas. Sneering that her convincing act ends here, Arthur announces that a true saint born in their kingdom has been discovered and orders her immediate banishment. Stunned by the sudden exile, Mira quietly asks if this devastating order is truly the king's command. Arthur angrily snaps that with his bedridden father incapacitated, his words carry the king's authority, and tells her she should be grateful he isn't dragging her through the streets. Scoffing dismissively, he turns his back on them as Mira silently decides it is time to leave. A herald brutally repeats the proclamation to the public, stating that Mira is exiled for the vile crime of impersonation and for claiming the power of their rightful saint, Marielle, as her own. The herald further announces that the high priest has been stripped of his office and imprisoned at once for conspiring with her. Walking solemnly through the stunned crowd, Mira listens as the people murmur her name in disbelief. Panic erupts among the citizens as they beg their beloved saint to answer them and explain what is happening. The confusion quickly warps into betrayal as the aggressive crowd demands to know if she had been deceiving them all along. The townspeople stand frozen in a stunned silence, struggling to process the abrupt proclamation. Whispers ripple through the dense crowd as they question if the saint is truly being exiled. Anger quickly replaces confusion as bearded men and distraught citizens scream at Mira, demanding to know why she won't defend herself, while accusing her of treating them like fools and laughing behind their backs. The vitriol escalates as the furious townspeople brand her a fraud, bitterly regretting that they ever worshipped someone who found joy in tricking them. Tura glances worriedly at her master, but Mira stoically maintains her composure and assures the nun she is fine. Suddenly, a furious citizen hurls a jagged rock toward the banished saint, ignoring a woman's desperate plea to stop lest he be cursed. Armored guards hastily cross their polearms to form a barricade, holding back the surging, hostile mob as Mira stands quietly before them. The thrown stone strikes Mira squarely in the chest, but she merely lowers her gaze without a word of protest. Maintaining her quiet dignity amidst the hatred, she elegantly lifts the edges of her dress and bids the rioting crowd a simple good day. Passing through the heavy iron gates of the castle, Tura mutters how deeply frustrating this entire unjust situation has become. The distraught nun calls the prince's treatment incredibly cruel and demands to know why Mira didn't argue back, to which Mira calmly replies that Arthur was not in any mood to listen. Tura fiercely insists that the citizens would have listened to the truth, recognizing that Arthur intended to force this banishment from the very beginning. The nun passionately declares that the people would have respected her if they only knew she was secretly the third princess of Idas. Staring thoughtfully into the distance, Mira silently recalls the strange conditions of her original mission to aid Roldaras without revealing her true identity. She remembers how the king of Roldaras himself shamelessly begged to receive her not as royalty, but disguised as a humble wandering saint. In her flashback, a younger Mira graciously accepted the desperate monarch's request, calling it an absolute honor. Her older sister had violently objected to the plan, terrified that sending a sweet 15-year-old girl so far away without royal protection would invite danger. Despite the intense familial concern, the youthful Mira playfully winked and flashed a peace sign to reassure her protective siblings. She fondly remembers her mother's guiding voice, instructing her to listen closely and understand that a saint's duty is not just one thing. Her mother urged her to be a saint who loves the people and is loved in return, holding the line until the destined day a true native saint is born in Roldaras. Obediently agreeing, young Mira had promised her mother that she would use her holy power to help bring peace to the suffering kingdom. Memories of meeting Prince Arthur, bowing before the king, and dedicating herself to the kingdom's salvation flash warmly through her mind. Returning to the present, Mira realizes she could have easily proven her legitimacy at any moment just by unleashing her power before the crowd. However, she knows that resisting would have only provoked Arthur to use violent force, and he would never have accepted her place regardless of the proof. She gently explains to a tearful Tura that a violent confrontation would only punish the innocent soldiers who were merely following their prince's orders. Glancing back one last time, she reflects on the life she is leaving behind without a shred of lingering resentment. She admits she originally intended to reveal her true royal identity someday, but now realizes Lord Arthur's cruel betrayal could not possibly have been prepared overnight. A quiet, unbreakable resolve settles over her features as she fully accepts the reality of her sudden exile. Knowing she can no longer stay in a kingdom that has violently rejected her, Mira firmly declares that it is time to return to Idas. Raising her hand to summon her holy magic, she begins to dismantle her protective barrier, reasoning that leaving it active would only hinder the newly born saint's power. Raising her glowing hand toward the sky, Lady Mira sorrowfully accepts that her power is no longer needed. A sweeping wide shot reveals the sprawling, fortified royal capital nestled peacefully amidst the distant mountains. Standing outside the massive castle gates, Tura urges Mira to leave at once for the long road to the Idas border. Tura explains they must first stop at the nearest town to visit the Adventurers Guild, hoping to hire protection against vicious monsters and bandits. Hidden within the dim shadows of a tavern, two cloaked figures quietly discuss their urgent need to hire armed guards. Stealing her resolve, a disguised Mira agrees and carefully watches her step as she navigates the rough terrain ahead. Glancing back at the fading royal castle one last time, Mira whispers a final farewell and prays that fortune smiles upon the kingdom. Elsewhere, a desperate, bloodied man clutches a saint's ring around his neck as he collapses near a shattered, smoldering temple. Staring out over the violently ruined settlement, he falls to his knees and screams into the void, begging to know why this tragedy happened. Transitioning back to the present, Tura checks on Mira as they successfully reach civilization while daylight still holds. The weary travelers finally arrive at Tamatriza, a bustling town situated right along the border of Idas and the Roldaras' royal capital. A sprawling aerial view showcases the dense, chaotic rooftops and crowded merchant streets of the bustling border town. Resting silently inside a rustic inn room, Mira turns her head as a sudden knock interrupts her thoughts and Tura calls out to her. Peeking through the cracked door, Tura hands her lady a rugged cloak, instructing her to change quickly so they can head to the guild. Concealed beneath her heavy, hooded cloak, Mira approaches the grand, wooden architecture of the local Adventurers Guild. The heavy doors clink open, instantly drawing the suspicious, battle-hardened glares of the rough mercenaries loitering inside. The chaotic tavern grows tense as several imposing, scarred thugs silently lock their eyes onto the fragile-looking newcomers. Stepping confidently up to the front desk, Tura claims they put in a job request and introduces herself using the fake alias Maria. The cheerful receptionist confirms an escort to the Idas border for Maria and Olivia, casually noting a recent, massive spike in similar requests. As massive thugs loom menacingly behind them, the clerk apologizes that their assigned guards are delayed on a prior job until tomorrow, though someone else might take the commission. A towering, scarred brute suddenly steps forward, leering down at the disguised girls and asking if they are in a hurry. Flanked by his sketchy crew, the intimidating mercenary smirks and offers to guide them personally for a so-called special rate. Smiling politely beneath her hood, Mira calmly rejects the shady offer, stating they are not in a rush and will simply return tomorrow. Infuriated by the dismissal, the massive thug violently blocks their path, aggressively demanding her attention because he is talking to her. Suddenly, a blinding, localized flash of magical light blasts the brute directly in his eye, sending him recoiling with a pained grunt. The mercenaries scramble in panicked confusion as an invisible wall suddenly blocks their pursuit, yelling at each other to stop fumbling at the exit. Stumbling out into the street, the frustrated thugs realize they completely lost the girls, cursing their own slowness over the phantom barrier. Back safe in their room, Mira expresses shock at the drastic drop in safety, while Tura urges them to flee Roldaras immediately before the spreading false saint rumors endanger them further. Confused by their sudden influx of resources, Mira asks her maid where she acquired the money for the inn and their new clothes, having thought they left the capital with nothing. Sitting comfortably in the dim light, Tura casually reveals that Lady Ida secretly entrusted her with valuables before they fled the kingdom. Staring at a heavy pouch of coins on the table, Mira recalls her mother's order to keep them close for emergencies, never expecting she would actually have to use them like this. Huddled in a worn cloak, Mira smiles bitterly at the irony of returning home exiled right after announcing her engagement, wondering how her brother will react. Tura glares with fierce determination, vowing that the people will never forget what Reuteras did and warning that Mira's brother Lloyd, Ida, and her sisters will never forgive this betrayal. Looking downcast in the dimly lit carriage, Mira listens as Tura reveals she heard detailed rumors about the true saint, while placing a request at the guild. The rumors describe Saint Marielle as a proper 16-year-old young lady from Count Dairo's house, blessed with golden hair and blue eyes. According to the gossip, Marielle supported the kingdom through unconscious miracles while entirely unaware of her power, only for the false saint clique to swoop in and steal the credit. Suspicious of the convenient timing, Tura notes Marielle is supposedly the Count's late brother's child and theorizes the kingdom arranged rumor spreaders well ahead of time. The fabricated backstory claims Marielle lost her father to a monster attack 10 years ago and was taken in by an orphanage until the Count finally found her and discovered her powers. Acknowledging that the High Priest's involvement means it cannot be a complete setup, Mira chillingly realizes this all started 10 years ago, exactly when the southern kingdom of Raidai fell. Speaking frankly, Tura declares that the Crown Prince could not have orchestrated this alone, meaning the entire country actively conspired to betray Mira. With gentle compassion, Tura urges her lady to stop fretting, insisting she has already worried more than enough for this ungrateful country. Smiling warmly in the shadows, Mira finally agrees, deciding to leave the rest to her brother as they face a long journey tomorrow. The quiet exterior of the rustic inn stands still against the night sky. Exhausted from the day's betrayals, Mira sleeps peacefully on a hard wooden bench. Gazing out the window into the night, Mira reflects that even her own mother and sisters do not share her blood, and notes that other saints cannot use their powers properly within her barrier. Overwhelmed by how her reality shifted in a single day, she wonders if her current disconnect is born of inexperience or a lack of compatibility. Pressing her hand against the cold glass, she remembers how the kingdom of Raidai possessed a saint yet was still destroyed overnight, sending a flood of refugees and monsters into neighboring lands. Surveying the quiet rooftops of the capital, Mira calculates that her protective barrier will fully fade in 10 days, casting doubt on Marielle's ability to overcome the looming monster threat. Staring blankly into the distance, she coldly accepts that if the new saint fails, this country is entirely doomed. A suffocating silence hangs over the dark expanse of the sleeping city. As the morning sun rises over the imposing city walls, Mira quietly questions if there is truly nothing left for her to do now that she has no place here. Pulling her hood up to conceal her identity, Mira reassures a deeply apologetic Tura and orders her not to use noble titles until they safely return home. Approaching the bustling guild entrance, a cheerful voice calls out to address Mira by her new alias, Maria. The friendly guild receptionist points toward the back, assuring the disguised girls that their requested escort has arrived and is not a creep who will demand anything weird. Stepping into the light, the receptionist cheerfully announces the arrival of the clients to a tall, heavily cloaked man. The rugged, sharp-eyed mercenary named Raoul turns his attention toward them. Raoul silently evaluates the small, cloaked girl standing nervously before him. The trio sets out immediately, navigating their way through the busy, unforgiving streets of the capital. Leading the two women into a secluded alleyway, Raoul's towering figure casts a long, imposing shadow over them. Smirking maliciously beneath his hood, Raoul observes that a young lady with hidden circumstances and her helpless attendant are the absolute perfect prey. Startled by a sudden noise, the disguised girl and the cloaked man freeze in their tracks. The cloaked man tells them to calm down, explaining that most people who come and go will look at them that way. He points out that wearing clean clothes with a filthy, mismatched cloak naturally draws eyes, though he clarifies he isn't there to dig into who they really are. Turning down an alley, he advises them to come with him if they want fewer run-ins with scum before reaching the border. Trusting the stranger's judgment, Mira gently nudges her hesitant companion and agrees to follow him. He leads them into a cluttered shop, explaining that it is a place for adventurers to gear up before a long trip. Calling Mira Olivia, he asks if she can use magic, assuring her that no one cares what they buy here and no information ever leaks. Mira tries on a hooded cloak with cat ears, feeling it looks childish, but Raoul insists it actually suits her. Addressing Tura as Maria, Raoul questions her swordswoman disguise, asking if she even knows her way around a blade since she is just copying what she has seen. Raoul firmly advises Olivia to keep her hood up because her striking silver hair stands out entirely too much. Realizing he is right, Mira admits she never thought about it before and channels her power to change her hair's appearance. Surprised by the sudden transformation, Raoul asks if she used magic, prompting Mira to internally panic since a saint's power is different and she cannot let him catch on. Choosing not to lie about her abilities, Mira stays silent while Raoul simply notes that her skill is pretty handy. Navigating the bustling market, Raoul warns them that traveling on foot across wrecked roads will take at least 10 days to 2 weeks to reach the Ida's border. Mira internally reflects that blending in as adventurers really works and decides Raoul's competence makes him trustworthy for the 10-day journey. With his own preparations already complete, Raoul shoulders his pack and announces that they are leaving immediately. As they set out on the rugged path toward the mountains, Mira sincerely thanks Raoul for everything he has done. Raoul dismisses her gratitude, stating it is just part of the job since he was hired to escort a young lady, a detail Mira admits she knew nothing about. Mira guiltily points out that Raoul is carrying almost all of their heavy bags by himself. The stoic mercenary merely stares ahead into the wilderness, completely unfazed by the heavy burden. Staring at his profile, Mira curiously asks him if her situation is really that unusual. Ignoring the question, Raoul compliments her transformed hair, telling her it is beautiful and looks like it melts into the sunset. Shocked by the kind words, Mira reveals that people usually call it the color of ruin, making his compliment a first for her. Shifting the focus, Mira observes Raoul's red hair and dusky skin. She correctly deduces that he must be originally from the kingdom of Raidai. Raoul deflects by mentioning the rumors of the exiled false saint, noting that such an event usually implies malicious manipulation or the approval of a real replacement. He darkens the mood by stating that the land where an exile happens always goes to hell afterward. He speculates that maybe the exiled fake puts a curse on the place out of spite, or that malice simply spreads disaster. Regardless of the truth, Raoul declares that anyone who knows what is coming gets out of the kingdom fast. With a grim expression, he concludes that a saint's justice and the safety of the people who believe in her are never guaranteed. Guiding Mira across the rugged terrain, Raoul warns that this country might also get destroyed by the false saint. A sudden wave of shock washes over Mira's face as the harsh words strike her deeply. Swallowing hard, she struggles to formulate a response while Raoul watches her closely in the silence. Dropping her gaze, Mira quietly admits she really doesn't know anything, prompting Raoul to declare she will just have to learn from here on out. The traveler's journey progresses as the sun sets over the distant mountain village, plunging the rocky landscape into evening shadows. Arriving at a massive landslide blocking the path, they overhear that heavy rains soften the ground and full repairs will take months. A frustrated merchant announces they must turn back, leaving a disguised Tura dismayed since they desperately need to get farther away. Raoul proposes going around on foot despite the collapse risk, while Tura notes the harsh mountain paths and unstable weather threaten their safety. Retreating to a local inn, Tura spreads a map across the table to rethink their blocked route while Raoul acknowledges the dire situation. Pointing at the map, Raoul insists their safest and surest choice is to lie low in the town until the road is fixed. Turning toward the window, the mercenary bluntly states he will just charge for the extra days, which Tura accepts without hesitation. Slamming her hand decisively, Tura argues they should prioritize avoiding worst-case situations, noting that facing these differences alongside someone might actually make them stronger. Staring intently at the map, Mira praises her brother's kind and level-headed nature, suggesting they should aim to rendezvous with his forces. Continuing her thought, Mira explains that he understands better than anyone why people shouldn't be fighting each other during this crisis. Though unsure of Marielle's true strength, Mira trusts her brother will carefully rein in his anger because Roldaras will inevitably face scrutiny over the sudden exile. With sorrowful resolve, the exiled saint decides she shouldn't stay hidden because events will move forward regardless of her pacing. Fearing her brother's limited patience, Mira worries the malicious exile rumors will grow claws if they drag the trip out too long. Looking up with determination, she insists she must reach him as soon as possible to convey her safety and her desire to avoid conflict. Tura frowns sympathetically, asking if this escalating disaster isn't simply something Roldaras brought upon themselves. Mira rejects the urge to abandon her duties, recalling her oath to her mother to remain a saint who genuinely loves the people until the next saint is born. Clasping her hands, Mira smiles weakly and admits her brother would tear all of Roldaras apart searching since he doesn't know where she is. Gazing fondly at her devoted lady, Tura smiles and admits she fully expected her to say that. Tracing a new path, Tura reveals a gentle detour used by lumberjacks that will be much faster than waiting for the landslide repairs. Realizing her attendant is held back, Mira notes Tura was specifically trained to cross mountains alone as part of her guard duties. Taking charge, Mira orders Tura to take the treacherous mountain path ahead while she takes the slower detour with Raoul. Pleading softly, Mira explains that splitting up will drastically increase their chances of successfully reaching her brother with the truth. Bowing her head in firm loyalty, Tura accepts the dangerous command and turns to inform Raoul of the change in plans. Raoul notes they can blend in with other travelers to spread the danger, while Mira hands Tura a letter to send via a guild courier once she crosses the mountain. Stepping out into the crisp mountain air, Mira apologizes sincerely as Tura securely shoulders her travel pack. Looking back one last time, Tura warns that this selfless choice puts Mira in the greatest danger of them all. Embracing Tura in a tearful goodbye, Mira gently thanks her loyal attendant and urges her to stay safe, while Tura apologizes for her presumptuous words and laments their first separation since childhood. Breaking the emotional moment, Raoul stares down at the young girl and bluntly questions why she trusts him so easily. Walking alongside him in her heavy cloak, Mira rationally explains that cutting out the haggling and danger helped him too, pointing out that their practical clothes and baggage prove they are prepared. She acknowledges his earlier guidance as honest advice, firmly believing that she can simply learn whatever she doesn't know from this point onward. Offering a gentle, knowing smile, Mira tells the rugged mercenary that deep down, he is genuinely kind. Her words trigger a dark memory for Raoul, bringing forth the shadowed silhouette of a man who once declared that this burden was his responsibility and that survivors might still remain. A desperate voice screams out in the flashback, urging Raoul to run and declaring that as long as he lives, the Raidai royal line will never fall. A bloodied hand reaches out desperately toward Raoul's retreating figure as the city crumbles into ruins around them. Snapping back to the present, Raoul warns her to be ready as they cut onto a rough game trail, pointing out a forester's hut that marks the strict boundary between human territory and the untamed wild. Exhausted from the grueling pace, Mira pants heavily as she struggles to keep up with the mercenaries' long strides. She sighs in immense relief upon finally reaching a patch of flat ground, prompting a slight, amused smirk from Raoul. Pausing amidst the towering, ancient trees, the seasoned mercenary glances back over his shoulder to check on his struggling client. Raoul casually explains that even gentle mountain slopes brutalize the legs and lungs far worse than flat land, a harsh reality Mira acknowledges between ragged, exhausted breaths. Analyzing their pace, Raoul offers to play it safe by taking a lower, longer route with more breaks and a 3-day detour, or doubling back to stockpile more food and water. Hearing the delay, Mira flashes back to Tura's retreating figure and feels a sharp pang of determination. Forcing herself to stand tall, the young saint wipes the sweat from her brow and insists that she is perfectly fine. Clenching her fists with renewed resolve, she flashes a bright, determined smile and loudly promises to do her absolute best to keep up. Unmoved by her bravado, Raoul flatly tells her not to push herself, noting that while she has good spirit, recklessness will only get them killed. As the grueling day finally bleeds into dusk, they set down their heavy packs to establish camp for the night. Sitting by the crackling fire, Mira earnestly asks to help with the chores, promising to only watch and learn, but Raoul refuses, joking that her fierce attendant would rip his head off if she got burned. Raoul warns her that their upcoming downhill stretch won't be easy since it's fast to lose footing, though he surprisingly praises how incredibly hard she worked today. Tearing into a piece of dried meat, the mercenary softens his stern demeanor slightly and admits that the view from the upcoming trail is absolutely breathtaking. His relaxed expression instantly hardens into cold professionalism as he warns her that they need to be fully prepared to encounter deadly monsters very soon. When Raoul asks if she has ever seen a living monster, Mira quietly shakes her head, prompting him to explain that without a saint to purify the corpses, the decaying monsters turn the untamed lands into toxic miasma nests. Later that night, Mira sleeps peacefully under her heavy cloak while Raoul stays awake by the flickering campfire, quietly whittling a piece of wood to pass the long watch. Gazing down at the sleeping girl, Raoul is haunted by her innocent claim that he is kind, silently contrasting it against the dark, blood-soaked oath he swore to his mother. His knuckles turn stark white as he aggressively tightens his grip around the hilt of his razor-sharp hunting knife. A suffocating, venomous hatred radiates from his core as he remembers the grim reality that the one who utterly destroyed his country was a so-called true saint. Staring blankly into the dancing flames, the hardened survivor scoffs bitterly at the utter absurdity of her calling him a kind man. His cold, predatory eyes narrow into a lethal glare, proving that beneath his protective exterior lies a deeply broken man harboring a catastrophic vendetta. A cloaked swordsman opens the guild door just as a desperate voice inside begs to hire anyone immediately. A frantic Tura complains about slow paperwork and fears getting dragged into danger, but a calm Mira urges her to settle down. 3 rough-looking mercenaries eagerly approach the women and offer to handle their troubles. The mercenaries boast about being reliable professionals who will quickly and safely escort them. Desperate to leave quickly, an excited Tura readily accepts the mercenaries' shady offer. At the guild counter, a cheerful Kazami tells Raoul that she has a request perfectly suited just for him. Glancing at the contract, Raoul questions the destination of the Ida's border and wonders if the clients are trying to emigrate. He immediately spots the suspicious aliases of Maria and Olivia, recognizing them as disguised highborn women who don't belong in a bustling town. Kazami excitedly slams a heavy bag of gold coins onto the counter, revealing that the mysterious clients paid a massive advance up front. As she theorizes that their eerie calm means they are either sheltered or true nobles, Raoul points out that he cannot just abandon them to shady mercenaries. Deciding to play it safe, Raoul instructs Kazami to make the mysterious women wait 1 full day. He explains he needs to gather information first because the timing makes him suspect these clients are actually the exiled false saints group. Kazami worries that the impatient women might hire someone else, or worse, that their massive payment is actually stolen royal treasury money. Raoul coldly dismisses her fears, stating that desperate people running for their lives don't have the luxury of trusting just any smooth talker. A knowing smile spreads across Kazami's face as she teasingly points out that Raoul simply cannot bring himself to abandon them. Raoul gruffly tells her to cut it out just as another guild member interrupts to ask what they are talking about. Meanwhile, the town erupts into chaotic noise as an official royal proclamation confirms the rumors of Mira's exile. The crowd expresses deep pity for Lord Arthur's supposed suffering while condemning the shameless fraud who stole the true saint's glory. Despite the angry mob cursing the fake silver-haired saint, one skeptical citizen quietly notes that the whole situation just doesn't feel real. A bearded man argues that the abrupt exile doesn't add up, questioning how everyone somehow knew the rumors before the king's announcement. Panic rapidly infects the crowd as they realize they have no way to survive without a protector, though some desperately cheer for the new Saint Marielle. Resentment boils over as they fearfully wonder what a cornered, powerful fraud might do now that she has been kicked out. Absolute despair sets in as citizens scream for help, realizing that their entire country is practically cursed without a saint. Flashing back to his intervention at the guild, Raoul fiercely yells at the women not to cling to shady strangers so easily. He promises to get them somewhere safe first, advising them to pick who they rely on only after they cool their heads. The narrative reflects on how peace holds only because society fundamentally trusts that saints will dutifully hold back the monsters. Back in the present, a cheerful Kazami calls out to Raoul that his client has finally arrived. A small, heavily cloaked Mira stands quietly waiting for her designated escort. She gazes up with clear, determined eyes from beneath her oversized hood. Settling into an inn room, Mira hopes Tura safely reaches the next town while Raoul outlines their plan to eat and restock supplies tomorrow. Standing in the bustling street, 2 cloaked figures discuss how the money they split up might have allowed her to join a good group and catch a carriage. A grim, mustached man in a dark hood listens silently to the ongoing conversation. Peering through a cracked window, a hidden observer carefully watches the suspicious hooded figures gathered in the alleyway. Disguised in their heavy travel cloaks, Raoul and Mira quietly navigate the narrow, populated streets of the rustic town. Pausing their trek, Raoul instructs Mira to wait right where she is for a minute. Reassuring his anxious companion, the mercenary promises he will be right back. Clutching her bag nervously, Mira agrees with a confused murmur as she watches him leave. While armed men aggressively search the town for their target, Mira realizes Raoul has not rested in 3 days and hopes he can finally eat in peace. Seeking cover, the exiled saint presses her back against a rough stone wall to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Elsewhere, a focused Raoul shoulders his heavy travel pack with a sharp, calculating glare. A menacing squad of identical, cloaked enforcers aggressively corners the intimidated townspeople. Crossing his arms tightly, a defiant villager silently faces down one of the intimidating strangers. Spreading out across the dirt courtyard, the cloaked soldiers methodically scan the area for any sign of their target. Drawing his weapon, a ruthless soldier corners a frightened woman and demands to know if she is Mira. The cornered woman scowls in utter confusion, angrily demanding to know who these armed strangers are. Dismissing the woman due to her hair color, the aggressive soldier immediately pivots to interrogate his next suspect. Grabbing Mira by the arm, Raoul urgently drags her back toward the mountains to escape sight despite her protests about the encroaching darkness. Glancing over his shoulder, the seasoned mercenary reveals he recognized the crest on the searching men as Count Dairo's private soldiers. As they hide in the brush, Raoul notes the soldiers were specifically hunting the false saint, prompting Mira to realize Dairo is the very man who sponsored her replacement, Marielle. Deducing their enemy's movements, Raoul explains the soldiers bypassed the landslide using mountain-bred horses arranged by someone intimately familiar with the treacherous terrain. Staring out over the distant town, Mira shudders at the thought that they would have been caught if they hadn't moved, while Raoul praises her instinct to keep pushing forward. A heavy wave of dread washes over the young saint's face as the reality of their relentless pursuit sets in. Hefting his supplies, Raoul grimly announces they must go deeper and spend another cold night in the dark to avoid drawing the soldiers with a campfire. Following close behind, the exhausted girl urges her protector to continue their grueling ascent. Trudging up the slope, Mira finally asks why Raoul chose to help her escape even after learning she was the hunted false saint. She stares at his broad back, her wide eyes filled with desperate curiosity and lingering fear. Pausing in the shadows, the stoic mercenary confesses that he knew the truth from the very beginning. Looking back at her, Raoul casually shatters her disguise by declaring she is the true saint of Idas, not some fraud or a traveler named Olivia. A bleak memory surfaces of a battered, younger Raoul crawling away from violent thugs, having barely survived a decade of utter terror with nothing to rely on. Desperately gnawing on scavenged roots, the broken boy remembers hitting his absolute limit and silently begging for a savior to pull him from the endless despair. Haunted by his past, Raoul bitterly reflects that if he hadn't let go of his brother's hand, he wouldn't have been left entirely alone. He questions how he could believe in himself or a saint after losing his entire family and home to the tragedy. Returning to the present, Raoul stares quietly at the exhausted girl sleeping soundly on the forest floor. He marvels at how she never lost sight of the kind of saint she wanted to be, even after this ungrateful country exiled her as a fraud. Watching her rest peacefully, he is struck by the fact that she could comfortably sleep beside a dangerous mercenary she barely knows. He realizes her ability to trust others so easily stems from her incredibly unshakable sense of self. Staring into the flames, Raoul finally remembers exactly why he recognized Princess Mira the moment he saw her. In his memories, he recalls the former king of Idas leading his own mighty army to drive back the monster attacks and save Raidai. While his older brother faced the laughing king of Idas with royal dignity, a young Raoul hid timidly behind him, completely overwhelmed by the monarch's presence. Despite his fear, the young boy looked up to the foreign king with deep admiration and envy. Raoul distinctly remembers the tiny, precious figure being held so carefully in the king's strong arms. It was a very young Princess Mira, observing the world with wide, innocent eyes. The next morning, a deeply embarrassed Mira bows her head and loudly apologizes to Raoul for her previous deception. Flushed with shame, she tearfully confesses that she was too scared to reveal her true identity and feels terrible for lying after claiming to trust him. Hanging her head in utter defeat, Mira groans that it was pathetic to try and fool him with a straight face while he had been playing along on purpose the entire time. Amused by her dramatic misery, Raoul looks away and casually agrees that she did look quite pathetic. Puffing out her chest, Mira formally introduces herself as the third princess of Idas, prompting a warm, knowing smile from Raoul as he welcomes her back. Turning his gaze toward the trail, Raoul hopes that successfully returning her home will finally allow him to repay his old debt and feel a shred of pride. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Roldaris, the bedridden king solemnly reminds his court that their last native saint was born 80 years ago. A nervous noble recounts how that past saint married the king's younger brother and suffered terrible mistreatment. Another noble quickly justifies the abuse by claiming her power was exceptionally weak and barely sufficient to craft talismans. The king admits his own ancestor hesitated to acknowledge her, noting that the orphanage girl faced constant discrimination from high nobility before dying childless. He laments that their kingdom has been completely devoid of saints ever since, earning them the reputation of a cursed land punished by the gods. Desperate for salvation, the ailing king hopes his son Arthur will proudly walk into the future with their newly discovered saint at his side. Playing the part of a dutiful heir, Arthur smiles warmly as his father insists that this union will wash away the sins of the past for the sake of the country's future. However, the moment he is alone, Arthur's charming facade instantly shatters into a cold sneer as he brands their superstitions as ridiculous. Lounging arrogantly, the prince expresses utter disgust at his people's spineless fear of an ancient curse, declaring that a saint is merely a human with a convenient power. Looking down at the capital, Arthur argues that blindly worshipping an individual destroys a nation, insisting that a human saint must be bound by royal law and rank. Reaching his hand forward, the prince coldly asserts that a saint is only valuable as long as she is completely controlled. Basking in the sunlight, Arthur proudly presents the new saint to the cheering masses, perfectly manipulating the foolish kingdom to his will. Disgusted by his father's orders, Prince Arthur sneers at the idea of playing the loving husband to a wandering woman who wormed her way into their court. In a dimly lit room, two men secretly discuss a rumor that a native saint named Marielle has been discovered in a local orphanage. A shadowy figure is instructed to keep the information tightly sealed while the high priest and a select few conduct repeated examinations on the supposedly noble-born girl. A close-up captures a wide, ecstatic eye as someone declares this miraculous discovery to be an absolute gift from above. Throwing his arms wide in triumph, Arthur celebrates the arrival of a native saint and revels in his newfound freedom from his foolish father's schemes. Staring out the window with a sinister grin, the prince plots to prepare the stage and rewrite the entire narrative with his own hands. He vows to give the kingdom the grand, dramatic hope it so desperately craves. To orchestrate his perfect scene, he commands his men to spread explosive rumors and set the public ablaze so they will all shout their fury at once. A hesitant subordinate admits he still believes in Lady Mira, but Arthur insists that crushing her is a necessary lesson for her own good. The prince coldly reasons that isolating Mira from everyone but her maid and spreading natural suspicion will make her eventual exile effortless. With a confident smirk, Arthur notes that his bedridden father's imminent passing and the chancellor's unwavering support leave him with absolutely zero political risk. A distinguished military officer and the high priest confirm beyond a doubt that a true native saint has been born for the first time in 80 years. Seated comfortably upon the throne, Arthur smiles pleasantly and praises the wonderful news. Pointing a commanding finger, Arthur orders the high priest to publicly testify that Mira is a criminal who deceived the kingdom with false power. When the shocked high priest stammers that he cannot do such a thing, Arthur glares down at him and notes the open defiance. In a ruthless display of power, Arthur loudly declares the high priest mad and orders the guards to remove him from the room at once. Ignoring the old man's desperate pleas about his royal appointment, the prince proudly asserts that his words now carry the absolute authority of the acting king. Arthur smoothly assures the room that a lower-ranked but noble replacement has already been chosen to take over the role without disgracing the title. To prevent any public unrest, he commands the guards to lock the screaming former high priest away in a deep, silent dungeon. A sinister smile crosses the prince's face as he ensures the old man will rot in the dark until ordered otherwise. Gazing up into the light, Arthur relishes the absolute control he now holds over the entire kingdom. In a shocking display of arrogance, the newly appointed Saint Marielle bursts with energy and loudly declares that she will purge every impurity herself. She wildly proclaims that giving and taking is completely up to her because everything belongs to her alone. Flashing a childish peace sign, A bright-eyed Marielle casually greets the approaching prince. A furious Arthur screams at the new saint, demanding to know what on earth she has been doing for the past 3 days. Unfazed by his rage, Marielle cheerfully offers him some tea and invites him to a nap party, completely ignoring his irritated refusal. Arthur harshly berates her for hiding in the temple to play games and change outfits instead of meeting her tutors or greeting her people. Thrusting an accusing finger, the prince screams at her for hiring jesters and private chefs while forbidding her from remodeling the temple without his explicit permission. Marielle innocently defends her extravagant lifestyle, claiming that gossiping with the priests about their favorite snacks is a vital part of her holy duties. As she gleefully overshares inappropriate secrets about rubbing one priest's chin and violently smacking another's rear, the horrified clergymen break down in utter humiliation. Massaging his temples in pure frustration, Prince Arthur aggressively scolds Marielle to learn proper manners since her primary job is to reassure the panicked public. Completely unfazed by his anger, a cheerful Marielle confidently assures him that she and the others have already prepared the perfect greeting. Standing triumphantly on a balcony before an adoring crowd, the newbie saint enthusiastically introduces herself as her new fans cheer for their big sis. Pointing a furious finger at the unrestrained girl, Arthur viciously threatens to slap her if she doesn't stop her incessant squealing. The prince complains that his carefully crafted script is already falling apart on day 3, fearing her overly cutesy act will quickly kill the public hype. As Arthur criticizes the new saint's complete lack of noble refinement, the high priest casually suggests her behavior stems from being pampered at an orphanage and the Diaro estate. Turning his sharp glare onto the high priest, Arthur demands to know why he isn't keeping the temple in line like his granted status dictates. The overwhelmed priest quickly defends himself, explaining that Marielle easily wrapped all the other priests around her finger before he even noticed. Infuriated by this sheer incompetence, Arthur immediately orders the chancellor to launch an unannounced inspection into Marielle's old orphanage to see what they are teaching. Clenching his fist with strict resolve, the prince declares he will assign non-stop tutors to aggressively fix her behavior down to her sleep-talking. The high priest suddenly interrupts the rant, hesitantly warning Arthur that they face another incredibly urgent issue regarding Marielle. Just beyond the capital's fortified walls, terrifying shadows of massive monsters gather in the grassy plains like predators waiting for their prey to weaken. Scoffing at the report, Arthur dismissively claims he already reinforced the patrols since increasing monster activity is nothing new. The high priest stares back with grim seriousness, forcing Arthur to finally realize the true threat is the failing barrier. The priest explains that because they lack holy magic, they can only infer that Mira completely lifted her protective barrier the moment she was unjustly exiled. Clicking his tongue in deep irritation, Arthur demands to know exactly how long Mira's lingering magical traces will keep the beasts at bay. The priest gravely calculates they have 10 days at most, meaning Marielle must prove her ability to drive the monsters back within the next week. A dark, determined scowl settles on Arthur's face as he realizes he must personally light a fire under the idiotic new saint. Inside the grand prayer hall, Marielle childishly whines about the creepy paintings while Arthur sternly reminds her that this is her new workplace. Pumping her fists in a stubborn tantrum, Marielle complains about the harsh treatment until the prince explosively orders her to sit down. Arthur firmly banishes all other priests from the room to eliminate distractions, demanding that Marielle deploy a holy barrier right this instant. Lounging comfortably with tea and her favorite plush toy, Marielle listens as Arthur points out he brought all her favorite items as a special compromise. Clapping his hands together in desperate urgency, the prince begs her to start by simply covering the temple with a barrier right now. The pouting girl completely ignores his panic, complaining about a promised tea party and asking how many times a day she has to do this. When Marielle tries to excuse herself to go whisper her fans to sleep, Arthur fiercely cuts her off and promises to handle it himself. Clasping her hands together in prayer, Marielle nervously prepares to cast her magic while the two men watch closely to gauge her actual power. The heavy silence is immediately shattered when Marielle blankly asks the stunned men how she is supposed to make a barrier. Meanwhile, outside the towering walls of the capital, the ordinary citizens remain completely oblivious to the impending disaster regarding their new saint. While townsfolk casually gossip about Marielle's exhaustion, Arthur's muffled screams echo from the temple as he desperately tries to teach the clueless girl how to use her own power. After producing a pitifully tiny magical poof, Marielle cheers in absolute awe while an exhausted Arthur and the deadpan priest force her to immediately start her 8th attempt. Straining with all her might, Marielle groans as a tiny spark of light struggles to form between her trembling hands. Prince Arthur watches her pathetic display, recalling how the previous saint easily covered the entire capital just by clasping her hands. Marielle cries out that such a feat is totally impossible, complaining that even forming this tiny barrier requires an insane, inhuman amount of focus. Unimpressed by her bold excuses after barely managing a barrier shape, Arthur pulls out a talisman, acknowledging her recent awakening but demanding she try a different approach. He explains that making her blessing visible and portable through distributed talismans will let the people feel her grace, mocking her by adding that even a saint from 80 years ago could easily do it. Looking down at her lap in defeat, Marielle awkwardly admits that she simply cannot do it. She nervously confesses that she cannot draw her power out properly and doubts she is suited for this kind of rigorous saintly work. Arthur's composure completely shatters as he glares at her in utter disbelief, furiously demanding to know what she can actually do. Pinching his brow in deep frustration, he sighs that her mere ability to glow on and off makes it highly questionable if she can even be called a saint. Accused of deceiving the priests, Marielle frantically defends herself, swearing that the high priests checked her repeatedly and approved her despite her inability to use her powers properly. Leaning in menacingly, Arthur threatens to denounce her as a false saint for fooling everyone, promising she will rot away on cold prison floors licking dew to survive. Terrified by the threat of prison, Marielle wails loudly, desperately insisting that the priests explicitly praised her amazing healing powers as undoubtedly belonging to a saint. Arthur hands the sobbing girl a handkerchief, telling her to calm down and clarifying that the grim prison sentence would only happen if she were truly a false saint. Kneeling to her level, he reminds her of the local legends, pointing out that the previous saint was weak and miserable, causing both the king and the people to lament. With a sharp, calculating glint in his eye, the prince leans forward to tell her exactly why that tragic failure happened. He states with absolute coldness that the past saint failed simply because she did not try hard enough. Urging her to polish herself through sheer effort, he explains that humans are meant to grow and warns her not to leave behind a legacy of debt and failure like her predecessor. He manipulates her by promising she will never have to live a dull orphanage life again, baiting her with visions of a prosperous country where she is beloved by all, free to sing and eat snacks. Assuring her she can act as cutesy as she wants, he commands her to follow his lead and gives her exactly 7 days to create a barrier covering the entire castle. His smile vanishes into a lethal glare as he reminds her that she will give it everything she has, because failing means she has absolutely no future. Clapping his hands together to initiate the grueling training, he brightly announces that they will also begin her etiquette lessons immediately, causing her to squeak in panic. Realizing the immense, suffocating workload just dumped onto her shoulders, Marielle forces a strained smile and mutters that he has to be kidding. Back in his office, Arthur groans about the endless problems regarding troop mobilization, only to be interrupted by a guard announcing that Count Diero requests an audience. Realizing this unexpected visit might actually solve his political headache, the prince orders the guard to let the count inside. The wealthy count kneels respectfully before the throne as Prince Arthur looks down at him with a stern, imposing expression. Staring coldly at the groveling noble, Arthur internally admits that he honestly does not have a good impression of Count Diero. He reflects on the shady rumors that Diero only found Marielle right before the priests investigated, clearly seeking to leech off the fame of her newly discovered saintly blood. As the count offers his deepest respects, Arthur deduces the man came early simply to avoid trouble after noticing Marielle's failure to publicly appear. Cutting straight through the pleasantries, Arthur unapologetically states that he lacks the time to chat and orders the noble to make his visit brief. Begging forgiveness for wasting the crown prince's time, the count dramatically states he merely wishes to know if Marielle is truly fit to protect their country. Sitting in his throne, the prince listens as a subordinate quietly reports that Marielle is not doing well, claiming something is suppressing her power so she cannot bring it out fully. A mustached noble violently interjects that this must be a curse placed by that wretch Mira, though the prince dryly notes he is far too honest for a private conversation. The enraged noble aggressively demands permission to move his private troops beyond his domain to capture Mira and force her to confess the truth. Prince Arthur reluctantly grants permission but strictly orders him to return quietly without alerting the public, firmly warning against inflicting needless cruelty on the exiled Mira. Several days later, a terrified man screams by the gods as the prince smoothly approaches to ask him how Marielle is faring. Smiling in dark satisfaction, Arthur notes his threat worked as he watches Marielle nervously mumble self-made spells in the prayer hall, having completely abandoned her luxuries. Considering this a sufficient temporary fix, he reasons that cornering her will force her to squeeze out some power, since the nation only needs the illusion that a saint exists. He silently confirms to himself that capturing Mira is his true objective all along. New rumors spread wildly among the citizens, blaming the sudden rise in monsters entirely on Marielle's absence and a supposed curse cast by Mira. Confident that Dairo will embellish and spread the hostility himself, Arthur anticipates that Mira will soon have nowhere left to hide from the public's wrath. Staring out the window with a sinister chuckle, he gloats that it will be incredibly easy to manipulate a worn-down, hated Mira once she is dragged back and convinced Dairo and Marielle orchestrated everything. In his grandly written play, the decorative Marielle will be publicly hailed as the protector, while a broken Mira is pushed into the shadows and worked to the bone-handling barriers under the false promise of redemption. Turning to an instructor, Arthur formally announces that it is time to begin Marielle's training. Pointing confidently at the instructor, he insists the job will be easy since she previously trained Mira, demanding only that Marielle becomes competent enough not to slip up in public. The instructor bows respectfully but humbly warns Prince Arthur that he overestimates her abilities. She voices her deep confusion over Princess Mira of Idas, finding it unnatural for an impostor to possess real power yet bizarre for a true royal with her unheard-of name and hair color to hide her identity. The instructor admits she ultimately forgot all her nagging doubts the moment she finally saw Mira's face. Surprised by this revelation, Arthur realizes the instructor was completely certain of Mira's noble status from her very first glance. A cloaked man points out that foreign royalty is rarely well known, noting it is strange that he was the only one in town who heard no rumors and found the situation suspicious. He explains that Mira rarely appeared publicly even in Idas, which easily prevented the citizens of Reuteras from connecting the dots and allowed them to slip away unchast. The cloaked man seriously asks if Prince Arthur truly never realized her real identity. A heavy silence falls as he supposes the prince genuinely did not know. The man doubts Arthur knowingly defied the truth, revealing that concealing Mira's identity was an explicit request made by King Reuteras himself. Staring off into the distance, the instructor wonders aloud why King Reuteras kept the prince completely in the dark. She reflects that Lady Mira hardly needed any instruction because she already possessed effortless, natural grace. Despite being introduced as a wandering saint, Mira would only smile in response whenever asked if she was secretly of noble birth. Just as Arthur realizes she possessed an undeniable air of nobility from the very beginning, a frantic chancellor rushes in calling his name. Startled servants watch in shock as Arthur urgently asks if Dairo finally brought Mira back. Instead, the announcement rings out that King Leroyd from the Kingdom of Idas has unexpectedly arrived. Striding furiously down the hall, Prince Arthur demands to know what the King of Idas wants while angrily berating the Chancellor for not reporting to him first. The Chancellor explains that a standing agreement between the kings of Reuteras and Idas dictates the visiting monarch must be admitted without question. Startled by the sudden news of an agreement with his father, Prince Arthur reels in shock as a surprisingly carefree Marielle bursts into the room. Clasping her hands in excitement, Marielle babbles about the brutal nation of Idas possessing 4 saints and hopes their scary king knows the secret to powering up her magic. Scowling at her overly carefree attitude, Arthur snaps that he wouldn't be wasting time reallocating troops if she wasn't such an idiot, while she eagerly volunteers to sit in and learn. Conceding that her eager spirit isn't entirely misplaced, the prince muses that promoting Saint Marielle for the future might actually be a solid strategic move. Granting her special permission to sit in, Arthur sternly orders her to watch him closely and keep her mouth shut while she cheerfully agrees. As the Chancellor formally announces the prince's arrival, Arthur violently hisses at Marielle when she cluelessly asks what the word embarrass means. Pinching the bridge of his nose in sheer frustration, Arthur wonders why his master plan keeps completely derailing ever since Marielle arrived. Heavy double doors creak open as an imposing figure suddenly enters the grand reception room. Narrowing his eyes at the entrance, Arthur realizes that a deeply unsettling feeling has been actively gnawing at him. Staring across the lavish carpet, the prince tries to shake off the sudden, overwhelming wave of dread washing over him. Stepping into the light with a confident smile, the visiting monarch warmly greets Prince Arthur. Offering a formal introduction, the Chancellor smoothly steps forward to greet the unexpected royal guest. Bowing with a hand over his heart, King Leroyd of Idas formally introduces himself while Arthur silently observes the legendary Silver Lion. Renowned for ruling his great nation after his father's death, The young king earned his ferocious moniker by bravely fighting on the front lines with a sword in hand. Introducing himself as the acting ruler in his bedridden father's stead, Arthur arrogantly mocks the king's slender physique and questions if he can even swing a sword. Completely ignoring the prince's insult, Leroyd casually turns his warm smile to Marielle and tells her to relax, instantly shocking Arthur that the foreign king knows her name. Apologizing for his armed escort, Leroyd explains that he only brought a few trusted men inside while his main force waits outside the capital to avoid intimidating anyone. Maintaining a diplomatic facade, Arthur smoothly apologizes for the lack of a proper welcome while pointedly noting they received zero warning from their border guards. Pressing his subtle advantage, Leroyd reveals his men had to casually dispatch monsters near the capital and asks for retroactive approval for using force on foreign soil. Realizing the king is exploiting the vague treaty to bypass their borders, Arthur forces a polite smile and thanks him for eliminating the monster threat. Dropping the pleasantries entirely, the Silver Lion leans forward and declares he came to this kingdom looking for two specific things. Attempting to regain control of the negotiation, Arthur confidently offers to lend troops and permissions before abruptly asking about the health of Leroyd's father. Visibly annoyed by the blatant deflection tactics regarding his bedridden father, Leroyd coldly orders the prince to get back to the point. Cutting right to the chase, Leroyd reveals that Reuteras ended foreign aid a year ago under the strict justification that their newly summoned saint would travel and heal the neighboring nations. He acknowledges that Reuteras saw massive improvements in food, security, and medicine over the past year, completely making up for their lost support thanks to the saint's powerful blessing. Smirking with absolute unearned confidence, Arthur proudly gestures to Marielle and claims all of this prosperity is her direct doing. The seasoned warrior king remains dead silent, his piercing gaze locked on the foolish prince. Sunlight streams through the tall windows, casting long, tense shadows across the sudden silence of the reception room. Sweating under the crushing pressure of the king's silent stare, Arthur falters while Marielle looks around in utter confusion at the sudden shift in mood. The foreign sovereign observes that the king of Reuteras was deeply tormented, noting that his choice was ultimately nothing more than using the saint. Recalling his father's words, Arthur remembers the old king confessing that he was the one who truly deserved to be cursed. Disgusted by the memory, Arthur silently berates his spineless father as an embarrassment for spouting such nonsense about using the saint in front of another ruler. Frustrated that the king never consulted him as the heir, Arthur struggles to understand the point of his father's hesitation and agreement. A sudden realization halts Arthur's internal rant as he questions when his father spoke to Leroyd and why the foreign sovereign is suddenly here now. Piecing the clues together, Arthur realizes the king of Idas agreed to admit a foreign sovereign unconditionally in exchange for a saint with silver hair, deducing that the Idas royal family has 4 saints including 3 princesses. Cold sweat drips down Arthur's face as the horrifying truth of the situation finally dawns on him. While a confused Marielle looks on, Arthur desperately tries to convince himself to calm down, denying that the exiled girl could be anything more than a wandering saint. Smiling knowingly at the prince's panicked realization, Leroyd coldly states that this matter is unrelated. The imposing king smirks at Arthur, praising the scheme-fond prince for being so quick to grasp the reality of the situation. Arthur's mind flashes back to the adoration of his people, who constantly praised him as an amazing leader. The citizens' voices echo in his memory, commending him for always thinking about the welfare of the whole kingdom. The flashback continues with the people declaring their country's happiness, eager to help a prince they care so deeply about. Snapping back to the present, Marielle enthusiastically repeats the lines she was told to memorize, boldly complaining that the fake saint is getting in her way while Arthur watches in sheer terror. Oblivious to the tension, she asks what kind of person the fake saint actually was. Marielle continues insulting the girl as a dumb, shameless imposter who flaunted her silver hair to trick people, completely ignoring Arthur's desperate pleas to stop talking. As Leroyd listens intently, Marielle happily parrots rumors that the pathetic nobody lured monsters and made everyone miserable, blaming the fake saint for her own weak power while Arthur internally screams at her to shut up. Clenching her fists, the clueless newbie declares that the fake Saint Mira is a filthy, despicable criminal. A heavy silence falls over the room as Arthur stares in absolute horror at the back of the seated foreign sovereign. Leaning forward in his ornate armor, Leroyd fixes the two of them with an intimidating, unreadable stare. The sovereign's piercing eyes narrow as he ominously asks them what is wrong. 2 heavily armored knights step forward with a heavy thud, commanding the terrified Marielle to go on. Sweating profusely and clutching his own throat in fear, Arthur hears the sovereign call his name. Leroyd coldly demands to hear exactly what this supposed fake saint looked like. Pressing the trembling prince for details, Leroyd asks if this silver-haired woman truly looked like a vile person plotting stupid schemes to ruin others. Barely able to speak from the fear of being killed, Arthur stammers out a denial before Leroyd reminds the acting king that he personally issued the exile decree. Leroyd reveals that a year ago, right after her engagement to the prince was decided, his younger sister Mira came to serve as a concealed saint at King Reuter's request before being suddenly branded a fake and exiled. Panic completely overtakes Arthur's mind as he frantically tries to think of a way out, while Marielle nervously asks if he knows anything. Desperate to survive and shift the blame, Arthur internally insists that he knew nothing and frantically throws Count Diaro under the bus. Pointing an accusatory finger, Arthur claims that even now, the Count is busy spreading Lady Mira's bad reputation across the entire kingdom. Sweating profusely in sheer panic, Arthur screams that Count Diaro used all of them to commit an irreversible act, leaving Marielle thoroughly confused. Recalling the conspiracy, Arthur remembers Diaro ordering them to mercilessly raise their voices against Mira all at once so she would understand the weight of her sins and realize she had no place here. Glaring at a terrified vassal, Arthur furiously notes that the man remembers the plan word for word simply because he truly believed exiling Mira was the right thing to do. The piercing, unyielding gaze of the silver lion flashes in Arthur's mind as a terrifying reminder of the wrath they have awakened. Remembering his terrifying confrontation with King Leroyd, Arthur recalls the monarch stating that while he had no obligation to harp on another man's shortcomings, he would offer one final warning out of respect for Arthur's father. With crushing absolute certainty, Leroyd bluntly declares that a man of Arthur's pathetic caliber is completely unfit to rule. Completely devastated by the sheer weight of the king's rejection, Arthur collapses to his knees in stunned silence as Leroyd walks away. The crushing reality sets in as Arthur remembers the warning that a new saint born into a long-dormant bloodline will not possess the power to overcome the miasma for several generations. Glancing back over his shoulder, Leroyd coldly advises them to treat Marielle well until a formal decision regarding their foolish actions is delivered. Stunned by the abrupt departure, a voice weakly asks if the king is truly leaving already. Desperately trying to salvage the diplomatic disaster, an official bows deeply and offers to arrange a grand welcome celebration for their guest. With a single, icy glare, the foreign king immediately shuts down the pathetic offer. Declaring that he is completely finished with them, Leroyd storms out of the room and leaves a broken Arthur slumped uselessly on the floor. Spiraling into despair, Arthur realizes their defending soldiers will soon be ground to dust while the public inevitably begins questioning why Marielle still refuses to use her divine power. Across the terrified capital, desperate citizens pray for salvation, completely unaware that their hidden saint is entirely powerless to stop the impending slaughter. As horrific monsters inevitably breach the walls, the citizens will watch their entire lives, fortunes, and faith in the royal family collapse into bloody ruin before their very eyes. Knowing that the neighboring kingdom of Idas cannot simply ignore a monster-infested border, Arthur grimly accepts that their inevitable military intervention will come at a devastatingly high price. Arthur envisions King Leroyd swooping in to save the completely broken nation, using his offer of salvation to publicly expose the true culprits behind the tragedy while parading a vindicated Mira by his side. He realizes with absolute horror that Leroyd's revelations will brilliantly weaponize the surviving public's grief, turning their pure despair into a focused, murderous rage aimed directly at Arthur. Clutching his head in a desperate panic, the disgraced prince violently rejects the horrific future awaiting him. Whining that their positions have been completely reversed, he curses his own ignorance, wailing that he never would have exiled Mira if he had known her true royal identity. Trapped in a perfect checkmate, he realizes that confessing will spark a violent riot, while lying will only provoke Leroyd further, leaving him absolutely powerless. Like a cornered prey waiting for the predator's fangs to pierce his neck, Arthur admits all he can do now is tremble and pointlessly struggle in the dark. Pacing like a trapped rat within his own castle walls, he bitterly notes that his arrogant laughter from just this morning now feels like a distant, cruel illusion. Biting his thumbnail in feverish anxiety, Arthur frantically scrambles for any possible countermeasure to stop the impending monster attacks before time completely runs out. He rapidly discards the impossible ideas of assassinating Leroyd or begging other cowardly nations for aid, knowing any such move would just trigger an immediate, nation-ending war with Idas. A desperate, twisted spark of hope ignites in his eyes as he formulates a plan to capture Mira before Leroy does, intending to force her to deploy the barrier and stubbornly continue his original scheme. Driven entirely mad by his own desperation, Arthur laughs maniacally, vowing that he will never let anyone take away the kingdom that rightfully belongs to him alone. A sensible advisor attempts to intervene, pleading with the manic prince to immediately chase down King Leroy and beg for the nation's salvation regardless of the personal cost. Flashing a completely unhinged, psychotic smile, Arthur dismisses the advisor's rational plea, mockingly stating that they simply do not understand the reality of the situation. Slamming his hand on the table, Arthur threatens to expose the high priest and chancellor for conspiring to exile Mira and the former priest just to keep this useless girl around. Unfazed by the prince's frantic accusations, the king coldly informs Arthur that he still doesn't understand that none of his schemes mattered from the very beginning. Sweating under the king's piercing gaze, Arthur realizes the harsh truth as Leroy mocks the very concept of a high priest holding any real authority after 80 years without a saint. Throwing his arms up in dramatic defeat, the high priest bitterly complains that he only played along for royal favor because his brother inherited their noble title, only for this pathetic country's plan to blow up in 10 days. Turning on his former ally, the priest sneeringly points out that if the new saint is truly useless, it just proves the crown prince is an incompetent fool who doesn't bother checking his facts. Furious at the betrayal, Arthur violently screams that the priest is the real idiot who sank the entire country by playing at background conspiracies while pinning his own lack of investigation on the crown. Stabbing his finger at the smug clergyman, the desperate prince screams that he was just a fool pretending to be smart while hiding behind royal authority. Oblivious to the collapsing political landscape around her, Marielle tentatively raises her hand and stammers that she actually isn't useless at all. Proudly holding up a single tiny charm, she beams with joy as she announces that she worked incredibly hard to successfully create just one for them today. As Arthur furiously demands to know who told her to make such garbage instead of a barrier, a tearful Marielle insists she did exactly what he ordered while the foreign king dryly notes her genuine saintly nature. Completely losing his temper, the prince viciously screams that if she cannot deploy a barrier right this second, she is nothing but a worthless girl valued solely for her breeding. Stepping forward to deliver the final crushing blow, the chancellor casually reads from a document and reveals that Marielle was never actually born a noble. Consulting the unannounced orphanage inspection reports, he explains that Count Diaro completely fabricated her tragic backstory and lineage just to claim the glory of reviving the saint's bloodline. While Marielle cries out in complete denial, Arthur realizes with sickening clarity that this perfectly explains why his supposed high-born saint severely lacks basic education and manners. Bawling her eyes out, the betrayed girl screams that the count specifically instructed her to forget the orphanage and play along because the prince would prefer a noble niece. Desperately grabbing onto Arthur's uniform, she wails that he promised her a sparkling life forever if she just followed orders and begs him not to strip her of her sainthood. As the smug priest laughs at the unruly struggle of a pathetic lowborn, Arthur violently shoves the crying girl away and screams for everyone to shut their mouths. Cutting through the pathetic display, King Leroy coldly diagnoses Arthur's true weakness, pointing out that the prince exiled Mira simply because he was terrified of a powerful, foreign woman he couldn't control. Ignoring Marielle's desperate whining in the background, the lion-like king commands the prince to shut his mouth, exposing how Arthur's twisted schemes were born entirely from his cowardly fear of Mira's overwhelming power. Completely unhinged by the brutal truth, Arthur whips around and violently demands the useless, low-born fake stay out of his business since they haven't done a single thing right. Staring down at the pathetic royal, King Leroy issues a chilling, absolute challenge by asking what the crown prince actually intends to do now that his lies have crumbled. Without breaking eye contact, the seasoned warrior king harshly reminds him that the encroaching horde of monsters outside the gates will not retreat just because a spoiled prince throws a tantrum. Delivering the final judgment on Arthur's character, Leroy bluntly states that a man of such pathetically low caliber is completely unfit to rule a nation. Falling heavily to his knees in the center of the room, the broken prince hallucinates mocking visions of his own arrogant past, laughing at his total ruin. Trembling with delusional paranoia and weeping openly, Arthur pathetically accuses everyone in the room of forming a grand conspiracy just to persecute him. Throwing his head back like a cornered animal, the hysterical prince screams at the top of his lungs for the royal guards to arrest them all for high treason. Leaving the pathetic royals to their screaming, the narrative shifts to the encroaching darkness as the ugly bunch of self-absorbed fools completely ignore their impending doom. Just beyond the capital walls, a massive wave of horrific monsters aggressively breaches the perimeter as the overwhelmed castle soldiers finally buckle under the endless swarm. Back inside, the pragmatic chancellor ignores the screaming and states he was only ordered to follow the prince's commands, prompting a terrified Arthur to demand immediate protection. Glancing away from the hyperventilating coward on the floor, the chancellor coldly mutters that the kingdom would have been vastly better off if only Arthur's capable younger brother were here instead. Walking down a dimly lit, imposing corridor, a solitary figure pauses upon hearing faint, mocking whispers questioning their mother's character. Outside the palace, a panicked crowd of citizens desperately begs to hear the prince's voice, terrified by the monsters lurking near their windows and questioning the foreign king's sudden arrival. Overwhelmed by the mounting chaos and the relentless demands for orders, Prince Arthur clutches his head in utter despair as he realizes the exiled Mira is their only remaining hope. Startled out of his panicked spiral, the prince's eyes widen in sheer disbelief as the deafening clamor outside suddenly falls dead silent. Seated upon the grand throne, Arthur rapidly composes himself to formally receive his royal guest, politely declaring it the greatest honor to grant an audience. Bowing respectfully before the throne, a mysterious dark-haired woman announces she has already purified every last monster threatening the nation, having rushed to their aid during her journey to the northern temple. Stunned by this impossible feat, Arthur offers his heartfelt thanks on the king's behalf, prompting the woman to smoothly apologize for mistakenly assuming he was already the crowned monarch. Gazing down at her tranquil, incredibly divine expression, Arthur questions in absolute awe if this savior is actually a saint. Remaining perfectly poised, the mysterious woman formally introduces herself as Ariano, the highly renowned wandering saint. Claiming she desires neither status nor honor, Ariano smoothly declares that serving the true king with her heaven-granted power is her absolute greatest joy. Grasping at this miraculous lifeline, an ecstatic Arthur eagerly asks if she will remain and use her incredible power to save his doomed country. Flashing a subtle, knowing smile, Ariano humbly bows her head and vows to do whatever the prince commands. Looming heavily behind the oblivious prince, the terrifying, shadowy maw of a massive beast metaphorically threatens to consume him. Blinded by his sudden salvation, Arthur breaks into a crazed, triumphant grin, confidently declaring to himself that he is truly fit to be the king. Far away from the capital, someone examines a cluster of dark, blighted berries, noting that monsters deliberately spread this disease because they prefer the rotting scent. Staring blankly at her companion, Mira points out that he completely ate the awful-tasting poisoned flesh, entirely ignoring his casual question about cutting the rot out. Changing the subject, Mira warns that the lingering scent of her barrier is rapidly fading, while Raoul effortlessly harvests the unaffected berries using her expert advice. Guiding her along the rugged path, Raoul suggests they stop and finish their current task before the rapidly approaching nightfall completely catches up to them. Approaching a burly shopkeeper, the duo easily purchases a fresh bag of dried berries for their long journey. The exhausted shopkeeper sighs heavily as he explains that the recent monster attacks and the fake saint rumors have caused massive panic buying, leaving his shelves completely barren. Startled by a loud, boisterous laugh, Mira jumps nervously as a merchant warmly greets her and notes he has never seen her around the busy market before. Waving goodbye to the friendly townsfolk, the two companions agree to meet up again the next day, noting exactly how much they have been working together lately. Reviewing their map, Raoul points out the specific border where Mira left her maid, planning to resupply at the crystal-clear lake town before heading straight into the mountains. Strolling through the cobblestone streets of the bustling town, Raoul instructs Mira to keep her eyes glued to the map while he explains their next tactical move. Leaning in closely, Raoul whispers that Count Dairo's pursuers are totally blind to their current situation, meaning the assassins will likely rely on basic, straightforward tactics. Warning her that the sparse crowds make them easy targets, Raoul insists they act like standard adventurers to avoid standing out, swiftly shutting down her hopeful theory that the assassins simply gave up. Intrigued by their earlier encounter, Mira curiously asks Raoul about contract mages, prompting him to explain that many magic users sell their unique skills piecemeal instead of running permanent shops. Raoul casually introduces her to Jairi, a uniquely dressed mage who immediately purrs his name with a wide, incredibly sharp-toothed grin. Twirling away with a playful wave of her dark dress, the eccentric mage tells Raoul to visit her shop the next day as she begins to happily gossip. Leaning in to thoroughly inspect the flustered Mira, Jairi loudly and teasingly announces that this is the very first time Raoul has ever brought a girl around. Glancing thoughtfully at the meal before her, She wonders if she actually likes smoked food. Raoul physically restrains an eager companion, warning them to leave Mira alone because startling her triggers accidental explosion magic. Turning back toward her friends, a hooded figure flashes a confident, reassuring smile. Briskly jogging down the street to avoid suspicion, Mira cheerfully asks Raoul if possessing magic means never having to worry about food again. Looking back over her shoulder, she realizes that magic actually drains a person far more than it appears and is definitely not an all-powerful tool. She finds comfort in the fact that even a saint's sacred power is not limitless or inexhaustible, noting that everyone has their own unique strengths and weaknesses. As they walk, Raoul internally worries about how long Mira can endure a monster attack, especially since Dairo's private soldiers could easily identify her face. Intently studying a map to navigate their escape route, Mira suddenly calls out to Raoul with unwavering determination. With fierce loyalty, she vows to protect him from whatever dangers approach all the way to the border. A heavy boot steps firmly onto the cobblestone street as they make their approach to a local inn. Hidden eyes carefully peer out from the shadows through a narrow wooden crack to scout the surrounding area. A sweeping high-angle view of the quiet town buildings highlights their temporary sanctuary for the night. Standing outside their adjacent inn rooms, Mira suddenly stops Raoul just as he turns to enter his own door. Reaching out, she gently grabs his sleeve and flashes him a soft, reassuring smile in the quiet hallway. Wishing him a warm good night, she turns and heads into her room as the wooden door clacks shut behind her. Grasping her door handle, a subtle ring of magic glows brightly as she engages a hidden protective lock. Exhausted from their relentless journey, Mira falls into a deep sleep, immensely grateful to rest in a real bed for the first time in 5 days. Lying awake earlier, she deeply regrets not telling Raoul the truth sooner, realizing it was horribly naive to think a fake saint would only face simple exile. Staring intensely into the dark room, she recognizes the urgent need to hurry their escape before danger finally catches up to them. Suddenly, a violent disturbance rattles the glowing doorknob as someone aggressively attempts to force their way inside. A brief memory flashes through her mind of a solemn conversation where she hesitantly addressed her mother. Back in the present, a tense Raoul stands before a scorched door as frightened onlookers report that an arsonist set a fire from the outside. Ignoring the terrified murmurs of arson, Raoul waves off the bystanders and steps up to handle the jammed, burnt door himself. Announcing his entry to a potentially trapped Olivia, Raoul pushes the surprisingly unlocked door open and rushes into the room. Bracing for the absolute worst, Raoul is utterly bewildered to find Mira simply waking up and sleepily asking if it is already morning. Slumping onto a nearby chair with a massive sigh of relief, Raoul thanks the heavens that she is completely unharmed. Mira casually explains that she ingeniously altered the properties of her magical barriers to block enemies while allowing Raoul's specific mana to pass freely. She proudly assures him that even if an attacker physically breaks the lock, the room remains completely impenetrable unless one of them touches it. Face-palming at her absurd magical competence, Raoul finally understands why she was never afraid while traveling, realizing they themselves serve as the magical keys. Offering a sheepish apology for causing him needless panic, Mira admits she secretly wove the protective spells on his room as well just to help him sleep easier. Smiling gently, the dark-haired man reassures Mira that everything will be fine as long as she remains safe. Analyzing the chaotic aftermath, he points out that the intruders were far too noisy and sloppy to be Count Dairo's professional kidnappers. Glancing at the shattered hallway, he deduces that the attackers were specifically targeting Mira rather than just randomly looting the inn. Urging her to pack immediately, he declares they must leave town right now so their mysterious attackers lose the trail. Examining her scorched door, Mira notes the lingering magical heat in the keyhole and confirms the culprit was definitely a mage. Staring intently at the lock, she explains she can easily track the magical thread back to its source, leaving him bewildered by her immense sensory skills. Angrily pointing at her ruined room, Mira demands they catch the culprit and make them pay for the property damage before skipping town. Smirking in amusement at her fiery determination, Raoul casually agrees while noting that door repairs definitely are not covered in his escort fee. Meanwhile, the failed assassins hide out in a shady alley, bitterly lamenting the limits of their destructive magical abilities. Listening to the passing townsfolk attribute the explosion to a careless drunk, the cloaked mages scoff at the sheer idiocy of the commoners. The leader gruffly orders his subordinates to monitor everyone leaving the inn, but suddenly pauses as a strange, ominous feeling washes over him. Down below the mountainside, A villager points excitedly toward the sky at the silhouette of an impossibly massive bird. Laughing off the observation, another man explains it is merely an optical illusion caused by the vast distance to the peak. The first villager stubbornly argues the perspective, pointing out that the enormous creature is actually flying directly over a nearby house. Staring up in growing horror, the men slowly realize that if the beast is truly that close, it must be genuinely monstrous in size. Back with the travelers, Mira questions the need for a bodyguard when they could just take a fast carriage to Ida's while relying on her barrier. The female knight gently reminds Mira of her lack of combat experience, warning that the physical strain of maintaining a moving barrier during an ambush is entirely untested. Placing a hand on a tree trunk, Mira graciously thanks her protectors for their patience while acknowledging that a carriage would be a death trap. Frustrated by the sheer injustice, the knight bitterly curses the ungrateful citizens of Reuteras for forcing their savior into such a dangerous exile. Looking back toward the distant capital with a melancholic gaze, Mira softly replies that blaming the common people will not solve anything. Suddenly appearing in the alleyway, Raoul and his young companion playfully ambush the cloaked mages with a cheerful invitation to chat. The female mage nervously attempts to flirt her way out of the corner, but Raoul instantly shuts her down by ordering her to drop the dumb act. Stepping forward, he reveals that their sloppy arson attempt left a glaring trail of mana residue that made tracking them ridiculously easy. The shocked mage stammers that tracking raw mana is practically impossible, prompting the little girl to smugly ask Raoul when he became such a good bluffer. Ignoring their desperate excuses about opening a shop, Raoul easily subdues the exhausted leader with a swift blow to the neck. Trapping the terrified woman against a sudden invisible wall, they demonstrate their overwhelming high-level magic as absolute proof of their power. Stepping out from the shadows, a furious Mira confronts the trapped assassin and demands to know exactly why they targeted her. With eyes blazing, she fiercely declares that while they can hate and punish her all they want, she will absolutely not let them endanger innocent bystanders. Standing tall and resolute, Mira vows to handle her own battles without dragging this peaceful town into her dangerous mess. Completely breaking under the intense pressure, the panicked mage hysterically screams that she has never met Mira in her life and blames Raoul for the whole misunderstanding. Complaining about being ignored, the eccentric mage admits she caused trouble simply because Raoul never pays attention to her. She cheerfully explains that Dairo's private soldiers were crawling all over the area and relentlessly grilling her with questions until it pissed her off. Smiling mischievously, she notes that she figured the soldiers deserved to feel uncomfortable and would rush over if she caused a commotion. She playfully confesses that she only meant to mess with the lock to scare them, but ended up scorching it when she pushed too hard. Raoul sighs and tells her to apologize and pay the innkeeper, cursing in frustration as he realizes they might have been followed from the inn. While Raoul silently analyzes the suspicious timing and the kid's weird reactions, the mage notices that his usual stiffness has shifted into a totally different kind of guard. Pondering if the supposedly fake saint can actually use barriers and mana detection, the mage suddenly wonders if this girl is truly the real deal. Before the mage can ask if she is a fake, Mira desperately shushes her with a plea to keep her secret, prompting Raoul to announce they need to hurry before they are surrounded. Waving them off, the mage warns them not to use the road cutting through the middle of town and suddenly tells them to wait. She reveals the juicy gossip that Dairo soldiers are currently hunting the fake Saint Mira to save the pitiful, frail true Saint Marielle from a supposed curse. Adding to the grim news, she explains that the Count got the prince's approval to seize Mira, blaming her for everything from monster attacks to tiny scandals in order to solve the kingdom's problems. Noting that greedy adventurers and civilians will also move for the reward, she advises them to follow the outer wall to the gate to avoid drawing attention. Glancing back, Raoul genuinely thanks her for the useful information without a shred of shame. Suddenly, suspicious men in dark cloaks ambush them from an alleyway, ordering the short one in the robe to stop moving. Leaning in aggressively, the lead thug aggressively demands that the hooded figure show her face. Raoul instantly unleashes a blinding flash of magic directly into the thugs' faces, prompting the mage to cheer for them to run while the men groan in pain. Dashing away, Raoul cheekily yells back for the mage to give his regards to the shop owner and praises the delicious dried fruit. While the eccentric mage laughs and wonders where the duo vanish to, the blinded thugs stumble around in total confusion. As the thugs guess their targets fled toward the town center, Raoul leads Mira into a sprint, explaining they must cut through the plains first because the mountains are currently a disadvantage. He details that the town has too many blind spots full of potentially hostile civilians, while the mountains give the enemy's faster horses an undeniable edge. Narrowing his eyes with tactical focus, Raoul declares that they will cut off that risk entirely. Thugs charging on horseback suddenly spot the fleeing pair and immediately order their capture. Visualizing the terrain, Raoul calculates that a straight run will get them caught fast, so he heads toward the farmlands and villages to narrow the enemy's route. Bearing down on them rapidly, a mounted thug levels his crossbow and aims for their limbs, following orders not to rough them up too much. Noticing the imminent threat, Raoul fiercely pulls Mira along and announces that ranged weapons are on target, but he has a plan. As Mira panics about the incoming attack, Raoul tells her to wait for his signal while the ruthless thug fires his weapon with zero regard for their lives. A massive, chaotic explosion completely obliterates a nearby wooden cart, sending heavy debris rocketing across the path to block the pursuers. Reacting with lightning speed, Raoul forcefully yanks the terrified Mira out of the deadly shrapnel's immediate path. The shattered remains of the heavy cart crash violently into the ground, completely severing the road. Utilizing the sudden destructive cover, Raoul and Mira sprint desperately forward to make their grand escape. Raoul and Mira brace themselves as a colossal, shadowy dragon descends upon them with terrifying speed. Staring up in disbelief, they realize this massive dragon flying in was definitely not part of the plan. The sheer force of the beast's arrival sends violent gusts of wind ripping across the battlefield. Noticing the creature circling ominously overhead, Mira frantically wonders if it is aiming for a specific target. Hauling her onto a stolen horse, Raoul ignores the cries of a frantic bystander and barks at Mira to hold on tight. Spurring the horse straight into danger, Raoul deduces the monster is targeting a fleeing caravan trying to escape into the nearby farming village. As the massive beast casts a terrifying shadow over them, Raoul grimly notes that while town adventurers will surely see it, they simply cannot save everyone. Leaning low over the galloping horse, Raoul calculates that with Dairo's men fleeing and the chaos distracting everyone, this is their perfect chance to make serious distance toward the border. Hearing the terrified refugees curse the fake saint for bringing this disaster upon them, Mira hesitantly considers putting up a barrier. Watching the panicked crowd scatter in terror, Raoul grips the reins tighter and refuses to let innocent people die. Surrounded by diving monsters, Raoul tells Mira that he lacks the power to save the crowd and must focus entirely on protecting her. His eyes narrow with ruthless pragmatism as he insists on this course of action even if it completely violates a saint's creed. Throwing herself into the wind, a tearful Mira passionately declares that her true creed is something else entirely. Flashing back to a solemn promise, Mira remembers swearing to her mother that she would never turn her back on those in need. The angry curses of the mob echo in her mind, blaming her for everything and wishing she had never come to this country. Leaping recklessly from the galloping horse, Mira channels her surging magic as she lands gracefully on the battered ground. Her hair whips wildly in the wind as she stares down the overwhelming threat with absolute, unshakable resolve. A horrific swarm of winged beasts descends like a plague of locusts upon the defenseless, screaming refugees. Instantly shifting gears to support her, Raoul violently slices through an attacking beast with a lightning-fast sword strike. He realizes they just need to wipe out the monsters or buy enough time for the evacuation to finish before reinforcements finally arrive. Standing back-to-back against the horde, Raoul promises not to push her too hard but demands they give this fight absolutely everything they have. Moving as a lethal blur, Raoul relentlessly carves his way through the shrieking monsters to keep them off Mira. As the crowd screams for anyone to help, Raoul orders Mira to protect the civilians while he violently thins the enemy numbers. Realizing the massive dragon keeps continuously spawning more beasts, Mira frantically warns that her normal purification will not work on something so colossal. Her eyes widen as she formulates a dangerous plan, knowing the physical toll of repeatedly using her magic with varying intensity is completely unpredictable. Abandoning caution, she screams that they have to risk everything and end this massive threat in a single, devastating blow. Thrusting her hands forward, she rapidly forms a massive barrier and vows to compress her full power purification directly inside it. Pushing her limits to the absolute breaking point, she desperately forces more and more magical energy into the glowing sphere. The compressed purification violently detonates, completely engulfing the shadowy dragon in a blinding, explosive pillar of holy light. Breathing heavily amid the swirling aftermath, Mira fiercely holds her ground with a glowing dagger drawn, ready to strike down any surviving beasts. Admiring the sheer beauty of the magical display, the little assassin marvels at the incredible sight before her. Stunned by the overwhelming power, her companion points out that just the aftershock alone completely wiped out their targets. Huddled on the ground before the relieved crowd, a cloaked figure tries to process the miraculous rescue. Breathing a deep sigh of relief upon seeing everyone safe, the young girl tearfully confesses the heavy burden of debt she has carried for so long. Shivering in fear, the terrified refugees frantically ask Lord Jader what just happened to the surrounding monsters. Kneeling down to comfort the frightened children, Lord Jader gently promises to investigate the situation while they wait safely behind. Staring at the devastated landscape in sheer awe, a seasoned knight realizes a single girl just obliterated a disaster-class dragon with godlike, divine magic. Cheering with overflowing gratitude, the rescued children happily declare that the miraculous big sister was undoubtedly a true lady saint. Glancing around the chaotic scene, the bewildered soldiers frantically search for the whereabouts of their mysterious savior. Lying completely motionless, an exhausted Mira stares blankly upward as her consciousness slowly begins to fade. Peeking his head into a rustic farming hut, Raoul gently announces that his sleeping companion has finally awakened. Approaching her straw bed with a warm smile, he casually asks if she slept well after her exhausting ordeal. Blushing slightly at her disheveled state, Mira quickly stammers a good morning and insists on tidying herself up. Leaning against the wooden doorway, Raoul explains that she passed out and slept for 3 entire days after they borrowed a quiet hut on the edge of a farming village. Ignoring his medical concerns about her breathing, Mira immediately apologizes for rushing into danger even though he tried to stop her. Brushing off the backlash as the result of using a completely unfamiliar power, she insists she is completely fine. Examining her own hands with a look of wonder, Mira confidently declares she feels an incredible surge of power welling up inside her instead of fatigue. Gesturing toward the window, Raoul reports the miraculous lack of serious injuries among the refugees as they successfully grabbed their cargo and headed into town. Sipping a warm cup of tea, Mira tentatively asks if there is any bad news to accompany his impressive report. Staring dead ahead, Raoul bluntly reveals that they have completely lost all of their supplies. Scratching the back of his neck, he awkwardly explains that the cargo vanished without a trace after he violently threw Count Dairo's soldiers aside. Pointing to her missing belongings, he deduces her bag was likely torn right off and flung into the distance when she deployed her massive barrier. Slumping against the wall with a resigned smirk, Raoul confirms they are now completely broke. Listening to the distant crowd continuously begging for a glimpse of the miracle saint, Raoul notes he stayed behind to ensure she actually got some rest. Looking down with a complex expression, Mira listens quietly as Raoul insists her brave decision to rush in truly deserves all their relentless praise. Gripping her dress tightly, she solemnly rejects the admiration while arguing she really is not that admirable of a person. Staring blankly at the floor, she softly confesses the dark truth that she has actually been burning with quiet anger this entire time. Turning her back to him, Mira bitterly admits her lingering fury toward the people who betrayed her and her own inability to simply accept the cruel injustice. Looking back over her shoulder, she realizes a true saint's duty involves letting Reuterus face its deeply rooted 80-year fears before a new savior can successfully guide them. Rolling peacefully onward, a simple carriage carries Mira toward a future where she hopes the next saint will genuinely love her people and be unconditionally loved in return. Recalling her first duty as a saint, Mira reflects that she took on the role with modest hopes since she rarely left the castle. Riding through the bustling streets in a carriage, she warmly greets the cheering crowds with a deep desire to live up to their welcoming spirit. The immense pride of serving the people swelled deeply within her heart. Smiling kindly at the elders, she fondly remembers the strong bonds she built over her first year of service. The memories showcase her walking proudly down a path lined with adoring, cheering citizens. Suddenly, the warmth shatters as the metaphorical hands of the people she trusted aggressively slip away from her grasp. Gazing with a solemn expression, she silently admits that she thought she had steadied herself and resolved to move on. Her mind flashes back to the devastating moment she stood alone before an angry, weapon-wielding mob outside the temple. Enduring their furious shouts, she reasoned that the people weren't at fault and accepted exile quietly to prevent further chaos. Despite telling herself not to blame the citizens, she could not help but wonder why they never questioned the vicious rumors and hurled insults. Remembering the ease with which they embraced a new saint, she bitterly questions if their sudden hostility happened simply because she was an outsider. Returning to the chaotic present on horseback, she admits that those lingering doubts caused her to hesitate for a split second during their escape. Staring blankly out a rustic window, Mira confesses that she still wonders exactly how many people truly believed the fake saint rumors. Looking down with deep regret, she admits to feeling angry over failed expectations despite knowing she had ultimately failed her duty. Reassuring her, Raoul gently states that such conflicted feelings are completely normal. He insists that this harsh reality was never what her duty was supposed to be, assuring her that it is perfectly fine if her ideals waver. Thinking of the smiling townsfolk, he tells her that she is still allowed to be angry even if she logically understands their actions. Looking at her with deep empathy, Raoul reminds the burdened girl that she is only human after all. Ashamed of his own thoughts, Raoul realizes he had been slowly putting Mira on an unrealistic pedestal, expecting her to never waver or lose her ideals like other saints. Lowering his head in intense self-reproach, he silently berates himself for being an absolute idiot. Startling Mira as he steps closer, Raoul firmly declares that she is undeniably different from the rest. Taking a seat beside her, he sincerely apologizes and admits that he clearly did not understand what a true saint actually was. Smiling softly at his earnest confession, Mira thanks Raoul for cheering her up and reassures him that his way of thinking is completely natural. Shifting the heavy conversation forward, Raoul leans in and asks exactly what she wants to do now. Flashing a small, genuine smile, he invites the unremarkable Mira to open up and tell him absolutely everything on her mind. Resting in the quiet barn, Raoul notes they could sleep a little longer, though he is already wide awake. Mira blinks in quiet surprise, her eyes widening as the comforting silence settles over them. Breaking the tension with a light-hearted comment, Raoul agrees that he is awake too and casually mentions that he is starving. Clenching her fists with renewed, burning determination, Mira explicitly declares that she wants to help every last person she possibly can. Unable to ignore the looming threat, she notes with intense worry that no new barrier has been set up in the capital since the traces of her own magic faded. Staring grimly into the distance, Mira admits she released the barrier because she feared innocent people would die if Marielle proved powerless before her brother could intervene. She confesses she hesitated for a split second when seeing the terrified faces begging for help, but ultimately decided it was best to leave the nation's fate to her brother. Her sorrow shifts into fierce indignation as she refuses to accept that the helpless citizens should be casually abandoned to such a horrific fate. Slumping onto the bed with a heavy sigh, she deeply regrets her naive silence, realizing from Raoul's warnings that the public's anxiety over a fake saint was far worse than she imagined. When Raoul asks if this harsh reality irritates her, Mira furiously clenches her fists and complains that things escalated way too fast and went far beyond reason. Stepping forward with a confident smirk, Raoul proposes they simply take matters into their own hands and save everyone, just the two of them. Fully reignited with purpose, Mira passionately declares they will openly show this country the true power of the Lady Saint of Idas. Raoul nods in agreement, clarifying that if they prioritize helping the citizens over simply rushing her home, they no longer have to hide in the shadows. He fiercely assures